Hey you guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. My last couple Tuesday videos have been pretty short, so I wanted to do a bonus video. As a true crime content creator, I'm always asked what my favorite true crime is, but I don't really like that wording. I do not have a favorite crime. I do, however, have a few cases that keep me up at night. I was originally going to do this video as like a top 5, but as I was scripting, it was getting pretty long. So this is part 1 of the top 5 cases that have really rattled me and kept me up on more than one occasion. These cases are not Canadian, and not all of them are murders. Case number 1, the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. I came across this case, I think 3 years ago. I'm sure it was in quarantine when Bailey Sarian did a video on it, and I couldn't believe how truly horrific this crime was. I had to do more research, but I'm gonna link Bailey's video below. So Sylvia Likens was a 16-year-old girl from Indiana. She was the third of 5 children, actually born in between 2 sets of fraternal twins, so I thought that was really cool. Sylvia's parents started working for a traveling carnival in 1965 and arranged for Sylvia and her younger sister Jenny to stay with a woman named Gertrude Baniszewski until November. Sylvia's father would pay Gertrude $20 a week to board both his daughters. Gertrude Baniszewski was born in 1928, dropped out of school in 1944 at the age of 16, and married her first abusive husband, John. She had 4 kids with John: Paula, Stephanie, John Jr., and Marie, and after 10 years of marriage, the couple divorced. Shortly after, Gertrude remarried a man named Edward, and that marriage lasted a cool 3 months before they divorced. After that divorce, she remarried her first husband, John, and had 2 more kids, Shirley and James. And then John and Gertrude would divorce again in 1963. I guess within weeks of this divorce, Gertrude swan dived into another abusive relationship with 20-year-old Dennis Lee Wright. She was 35. The two would have a child together in 1964, Dennis Lee Wright Jr., but shortly after the child's birth, Dennis Sr. bailed. Over my dead body would I ever name my child after my abusive husband, and she did it twice. Anyway, so by 1965, Gertrude was a 36-year-old single mother of 7 with 3 failed marriages under her belt. Sylvia and Jenny would move into the Baniszewski house just after the 4th of July in 1965, and for the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. It was 2 weeks later the payments from their father started showing up later than the arranged payment date. Gertrude spanked the girls with a paddle because, quote, "I took care of you bitches for nothing," unquote. It wouldn't take long for this abuse to escalate and be focused mainly on Sylvia. Sylvia would regularly be beaten and starved, being offered only leftovers or spoiled food. The abuse and humiliation just got worse. After Sylvia had said something about having a boyfriend in Long Beach, Gertrude accused her of being pregnant and kicked her in the genitals. At the same time, Paula, the oldest daughter, who was 3 months pregnant herself, attacked Sylvia, hitting her off of a chair and onto the kitchen floor. It was around this same time in late August that Sylvia and Jenny were both paddled 15 times for allegedly eating too much at a church supper. Again, things just kept getting darker and darker, with the entire family participating in the abuse and even inviting the neighborhood children to join. They would even force her own sister Jenny to participate in the abuse, or she'd get the same treatment. Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Lepper once force-fed Sylvia a hot dog covered in condiments and spices, and when she threw it up, she was forced to eat that. One day at school, it was determined that Sylvia had started a rumor about Stephanie, and when she was confronted and it was established that yes, she had started this rumor, Stephanie punched her but immediately became emotional. But Stephanie had a boyfriend named Coy Hubbard who also heard about the rumor. He beat the hell out of Sylvia, slapping her and smashing her head into the wall. Paula once broke her own wrist, hitting Sylvia in the jaw, and then continued to beat Sylvia with her cast afterward. Gertrude would encourage violence against Sylvia, and even charge neighborhood kids 5 cents each to brutally attack her. They would practice their judo skills on her. They would burn her with cigarettes. Gertrude would whip Sylvia with a police belt. They burned her fingertips with matches and pulled her fingernails all the way back. On 2 occasions, Sylvia was forced to strip in front of a group of school kids and masturbate with a glass Coke bottle. When it was found out that Sylvia had been given a sandwich at the park when she met up with one of her older sisters, Gertrude and Paula choked her, threw her into a scalding hot bath to cleanse her, while beating her head against the side of the tub when she lost consciousness. Even Gertrude's younger children, 12-year-old John Jr. and 10-year-old Marie, would assist in the brutality, often being provoked by Gertrude. John Jr. and Gertrude once smeared a dirty diaper on Sylvia's mouth and gave her a half a glass of water for the whole day. Sylvia and Jenny's parents did visit once on October 5th, 1965, but neither girl showed any signs of distress or told their parents what was going on, probably because Gertrude was present at all times. When they left, Gertrude taunted Sylvia. "What are you gonna do now, Sylvia, now that they're gone?" Just look at her. She just looks like an evil bitch. Oof. The girls met up with their older sister, Diana, at a park and told her about the abuse. But not only did she think that the girls were exaggerating, she had no idea where they were staying. She didn't know where this house was. It was after the bathtub incident that a father of a boy in the neighborhood called the school nurse to report a child with open sores living at the Baniszewski house. Since Sylvia had been absent from school for a few days, the nurse went to the house. Gertrude told the nurse that Sylvia had run away, was out of control, and a bad influence on her own children, and that the open sores were due to poor hygiene. That was good enough for the nurse because there was never another inquiry. The girl's sister did eventually find out where they were living and went to the Baniszewski house to see her sisters. Gertrude told her that the girls were not allowed to see her and ordered her to get off her property. 2 weeks later, Jenny ran into this sister at the park, and when she asked how Sylvia was doing, Jenny said, "I can't tell you, I'll get in trouble." By October, due to the severity and frequency of the abuse, Sylvia became incontinent. This resulted in Gertrude tying Sylvia up in the basement, often naked. Sometimes she would even tie Sylvia to a railing on the ceiling with her feet barely touching the floor. It was during her time confined in the basement that Gertrude, her children, and the neighborhood children would restrain and scald Sylvia in an extremely hot bath, and they would even rub salt into her many open wounds. On October 22nd, things took an even more cruel turn. 12-year-old John Jr. teased Sylvia with a bowl of soup, offering the extremely malnourished girl a meal with no spoon. When she attempted to eat the soup with her fingers, he grabbed it away. Gertrude cruelly allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs that night on the condition she not wet herself. Well, obviously, due to the extreme brutality Sylvia was facing, she couldn't help it. The next morning, when Gertrude learned of the inevitable, she forced Sylvia to strip and once again masturbate with a glass bottle in front of everyone as punishment, before being physically thrown back down into the basement. Shortly after this, Gertrude called Sylvia back up from the basement into the kitchen and made her strip. Gertrude told Sylvia, "You've branded my daughters, now I'm gonna brand you." 11-year-old Marie heated a needle, and Gertrude started carving the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," on Sylvia's stomach. I don't know if Gertrude just got tired or bored, but at one point she decided to take Jenny to the grocery store and made 14-year-old Richard Hobbs take over and complete the sentence. Immediately after being branded with a hot needle, 10-year-old Shirley and 14-year-old Hobbs took Sylvia into the basement and used an anchor bolt to brand the letter S just under Sylvia's left breast. The pair ended up branding the S backwards, so it looked more like a 3. It's uncertain whether the S was supposed to stand for Sylvia or slave, or meant nothing but general brutality and cruelty. Later that day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to show everyone her brand, telling people she had received it at a sex party. That night, Sylvia knew she was going to die and told Jenny so. The next morning, Gertrude made Sylvia write a letter to her parents stating she had run away. Gertrude dictated Sylvia to write that it was a group of teenage boys she had agreed to have sexual relations with that were responsible for her abuse and mutilation. After Sylvia was finished writing the letter, she was again tied to the ceiling railing in the basement and offered crackers. Sylvia declined, telling them to give them to the dog. Gertrude force-fed Sylvia the crackers, while John Jr. continued to beat her in the abdomen. On October 25th, Sylvia overheard Gertrude's plan to get rid of her once and for all. Gertrude was to send John Jr. and Jenny into the woods with Sylvia, blindfolded, and leave her there to die. After overhearing this, Sylvia made a desperate attempt to escape, but because of her malnourishment and the severity of her injuries, Gertrude caught her. Gertrude force-fed Sylvia crackers again, which she couldn't even chew due to extreme dehydration. Gertrude repeatedly struck Sylvia with a curtain rod until it was shaped into a 90-degree angle. Coy Hubbard then took the rod and delivered one final blow to Sylvia's head, rendering her unconscious. By morning, Sylvia couldn't speak. She had no coordination, and she was delirious. She couldn't even bite into a rotten pear that she was given to eat, stating that it felt like her teeth were loose. Gertrude had brought a garden hose into the house, and 12-year-old John Jr. evilly laughed as he cleaned Sylvia by spraying her down. Sylvia would make one more attempt to flee, but because she was so emaciated, she didn't even make it to the stairs. Gertrude stomped on Sylvia's head. Gertrude ordered her daughter Stephanie to clean Sylvia, and it's alleged that Stephanie became emotional and tried to cuddle Sylvia during this time. At one point, Stephanie and Richard Hobbs decide to give Sylvia like a normal, warm, soapy bath and dress her in clean clothes. When they put Sylvia on the mattress, she managed to meekly whisper that her daddy was there and that Stephanie would take her home. It's alleged Stephanie turned to her younger sister Shirley and said, "Oh, she'll be all right." I'm unsure how long it would take, but eventually Stephanie would notice that Sylvia stopped breathing and attempted to give her mouth to mouth. All while Gertrude was screaming that Sylvia was faking it. Gertrude even went over and began hitting the already lifeless corpse with a book, yelling, "Faker, faker." It didn't take long for Gertrude to realize Sylvia was in fact dead and started to panic. She ordered Richard Hobbs to go call police from a payphone. Police arrived around 6:30 p.m. and found a brutally beaten and mutilated Sylvia on a dirty mattress. Gertrude gave police the letter she forced Sylvia to write and told them that she had been tending to Sylvia for over an hour before she died. She also told police that Sylvia had previously run away with a group of teenage boys, only returning to the house that afternoon without a shirt on, holding the letter. While all of this was going on, Paula stood there holding a Bible and said that Sylvia's death was meant to happen. Then, I guess she looked at Jenny and told her that if she wanted to live with them, they would treat her like their own sister. Gertrude prepared Jenny with what she was to tell police, and she did, but she managed to be able to whisper to one of the police officers, "Get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." Jenny's statement was enough to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs that night. At first, Gertrude denied any knowledge or involvement in Sylvia's torture and death. The next day, she admitted to knowing that the kids physically and emotionally abused Sylvia, throwing Paula and Coy under the bus, stating they committed most of the abuse. Gertrude admitted to making Sylvia sleep in the basement when she wet the bed, but only 3 times. Paula and John Jr. both signed statements detailing their abuse against Sylvia, including beating her, burning her with cigarettes, and pushing her down the stairs. It's said no one in the family showed any remorse. By October 29th, 5 neighborhood children were also arrested and charged with causing injury to a person. One of these children was Michael Monroe, and it was his father that was the one that called the school nurse to report Sylvia having open sores. All 5 children were released to their parents, but subpoenaed to testify as witnesses in the upcoming trial. Sylvia's autopsy report was as horrific as you would expect it to be. Her official cause of death would be ruled as subdural hematoma due to a severe blow to the right temple. Cough, cough, Coy Hubbard. I think he delivered the lethal blow, but they're all guilty. Sylvia was extremely malnourished. She had over 150 separate wounds on her body, bruises, burns. Her skin was peeling off. Her fingernails had been bent all the way back, and her vaginal cavity was swollen almost shut. Autopsy showed that rigor mortis had already set in, meaning Sylvia had been dead for 8 hours before they found her. However, she was bathed, possibly after death, and that would speed up rigor mortis. The trial began on April 18th, 1966. Gertrude, Paula, John Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs were all being tried together for first-degree murder. In early December 1965, Stephanie was released from custody after her lawyer proved evidence to be insufficient. Stephanie waived her immunity against prosecution and agreed to testify against her family. I don't believe Stephanie was innocent in all this, but I do believe she was the only one that showed even slight remorse or sympathy for Sylvia. May 18th, 1966, the jury would take 8 hours to find Gertrude guilty of first-degree murder, Paula guilty of second-degree murder, and sentence them both to life in prison. John Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs were all found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 to 21 years in the Indiana Reformatory. Unfortunately, justice wasn't served at all. In 1971, Gertrude and Paula were retried. Paula decided to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter so that she didn't have to face another trial, and she was resentenced to 2 to 21 years. And then despite the fact that she had tried to escape prison twice, she was paroled in December of 1972. She would go on to change her name to Paula Pace, move to Iowa, get married, have a couple kids, and work as an aide in an elementary school. It would take until 2012 when her real identity was revealed and she was thankfully fired. That was 11 years ago. Who knows what she's doing now? Gertrude would be found guilty of second-degree murder for the second time, and again, sentenced to life imprisonment. However, Gertrude would only spend 14 years behind bars, being paroled in 1985. She was described as a model prisoner. Some even lovingly referred to her as Mom. Ugh. Gertrude never took responsibility for her huge role in Sylvia's murder. She claimed that she wasn't sure about her role in the murder because she was on drugs, but takes full responsibility for whatever happened to Sylvia. That was enough for the parole board because she was released on December 4th, 1985. She changed her name to Nadine Van Fossen, which is just her middle name and her maiden name, and moved to Iowa, presumably to live with that wretched Paula. Thankfully, Gertrude would only get about 5 years of freedom, as she died on June 16, 1990 from lung cancer at the age of 61. Bye, bitch. Hope you're burning in hell. Stephanie, who was 15 at the time, had her charges dropped because she admitted guilt and testified against the rest of the defendants. She too changed her name, got married, had a gaggle of kids, and became a teacher. We think she lives in Florida, but who knows? John Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Richard Hobbs would all serve less than their sentence time. They were sentenced to 2 to 21 years, and all three were paroled on February 27, 1968. John Jr. changed his name to John Blake and, of course, started working for a church, counseling children of divorced parents. Years later, he would release a statement acknowledging that he and everyone else involved deserved longer sentences and harsher punishments, but also said that young offenders can be rehabilitated. He would later admit he liked the attention the court case had brought him. Look at this boat. Oh, you're so heavy. He would later admit he liked the attention the court case brought him, even saying he, quote, only hit Sylvia once. So yeah, he wasn't remorseful at all, in my opinion. He died in 2005 from diabetes at the age of 52. LOL. Coy Hubbard stayed in the area and didn't change his name. He was in and out of prison for the remainder of his life and just a general piece of shit. He was involved in another murder in 1977, the murder of 2 young men, but ended up being acquitted. Following the release of a 2007 movie called An American Crime, depicting Sylvia's torture and death, Coy Hubbard was fired from his job, and then died of a heart attack in June 2007 at the age of 56. Again, allow me to laugh. No one deserves early death more than these people. Richard Hobbs' fate may be the most satisfying. He was released, suffered at least one mental breakdown, and died from lung cancer at the age of 21. You love to see karma at work. Gertrude's 3 younger children, Marie, Shirley, and James, would all be placed in separate foster homes until the late 60s when their father regained custody of them, and he changed their last names to Blake. The youngest child, Dennis Lee Wright, would be adopted out. Everyone in this story died fairly young, including Dennis Lee Wright. Nobody made it over the age of 62. So I think you can see why this case haunts me and stays in the back of my head and keeps me up at night. The sheer evil and brutality of what Sylvia went through is gut-wrenching. One of the lawyers said that Sylvia's treatment was comparable to a Nazi concentration camp. I don't understand how so many people could collectively torture her for fun. So many bystanders. It's so tragic. I think every single one of the defendants should have been sentenced to death. Even the children. I don't give a fuck. Why not? There are no words to describe how brutal and evil their crime was. Let me know what you think of poor Sylvia's story. Have you heard of this before, or is this the first time you're hearing about it? I can't believe this case isn't more globally known just due to the severity of it. But I think that's it for me for today. That was really heavy and I need to go decompress. I will have Bailey Sarian's video linked below if you're interested, and also my link tree. Like, subscribe, comment, send love letters, hate mail, do whatever you want to do. Just don't kill anyone or join a cult. Thanks again for hanging out, and I will catch you guys next time. Later.